Well, hello everyone and welcome to another very exciting episode here on the My Gardener channel. I'm so excited for this episode in our continuing series of how to grow in containers. Today's episode is going to be on asparagus. This episode has been requested so many times because of our growing guides, and I feel bad because we just now got into our container growing guides series, and it's something that I feel like a lot of people could have been growing asparagus had we just gotten to this sooner. So we're getting to it now. Forgive me for it being so late, but I think you all are really going to enjoy it. So let's get on into it now. The first thing you need to know about growing asparagus in containers is the fact that it's rather difficult if you do not have a large enough container. And I want to make that the premise because all other things staying consistent, it's a perennial. And perennials need a large container. And I think that's something that's going to discourage a lot of people, but don't let it discourage you because big containers are really easy to find. You just need the space for them. And a lot of times people don't want to grow that much asparagus, which is great because they also require lots of space as well. And so it's not something that I really say is one of the easiest plants to grow in containers because it is more hands-on than some of your other plants. With that being said, I hope that you will enjoy this growing guide and at least try it because number one, you never know unless you try. And number two, it is very easy to grow if you just follow these steps, but it is significantly more hands-on. Just letting you know than most of your plants because most of your plants are annuals and these are perennials, meaning that there's some additional steps to growing asparagus that you would not normally do for some of your other annuals. And that's all really. So let's get started here. Let's go over to the potting up station. We're going to talk about the pot size because again, that is very important when talking about growing asparagus. And then we're also going to talk about some of the other essentials like fertilizing and spacing and then overwintering, which you're going to have to kind of imagine because right now we're actually going into summer. But overwintering is very important when talking about asparagus. So let's go do that. And this is the size container that we're going to be using for our asparagus. Now, I was not lying when I said it's a huge container. This is a 10-gallon container. Now with this, it's going to be able to grow successfully. So without this, you're not going to be able to grow it successfully for many reasons. I will post a card over there to a video that we did showing just how big asparagus roots get. And I think oftentimes people underestimate how large they actually get. And they want to put them in a pot like this. I am so sorry. But you know, if you put it in a pot like this, you're asking for your asparagus to die because number one, your asparagus roots grow so fast you can't even imagine. So get that out of your mind right now. You need a huge pot for asparagus because asparagus roots are some of the fastest growing roots, some of the most aggressive roots, and they just need all that space to get established because the fact they're perennials and perennials overwinter, which means they need to get below that frost line to escape their impending death. So with that out of the way, let's fill this up and then we're going to plant up the asparagus. So now that we've gotten the soil in the container, I want to stress to make sure you fill the pot close to where you plan on leaving it. This pot is so heavy once you have filled it with soil. And I don't care if you're the strongest man in the world, this is gonna be a pain in the butt to lug around. So what I wanna stress is either put it on casters and that we can wheel it from place to place, or put it on a dolly where you can move it, or just fill it where you plan on leaving it because it's heavy. Now, the next thing you wanna do is you wanna make sure that you fill it with a potting soil that is very loose. This soil is our go-to mix for our pots. It is very crumbly, it's very aerated, it's very rich in organic matter, which is super important for growing asparagus well. And also it's potting specific. Potting specific mixes are important because they are geared for growing in pots. Does not take a scientist to know that. You know, it's not that difficult to realize that the reason why they call it potting mix is because there's other components in it that makes it good for growing in containers. In traditional soil, you have fungus, you have microbes, you have worms, you have other plant roots and things like that that just helps to keep the soil aerated. It even has pebbles and different size soil that really helps keep the soil loose and fluffy in a container that's hard to replicate. And so you find often that if you go with like a topsoil or just a cheap bagged soil, what will happen is it packs down really hard and it does not retain moisture very well. And you just can't have that in a container garden, especially with something that has an aggressive root system like asparagus, something that really needs the good rich soil like asparagus. And so, you know, go with a potting specific mix if you're gonna do that. Now the next thing as well is make sure, if you're gonna make it yourself, make sure you do it right. If you're gonna make your own potting mix, make sure that it's 1 part compost to 1 part vermiculite to 1 part perlite. You can even add sand, so 1 part sand would be great as well, because that additional drainage is so important for asparagus. Asparagus is one of the finickiest plants to having wet roots. It needs that well-draining soil to do very well. Otherwise, the plant's just gonna die off, because the plants actually produce a crown. And it's not like a crown that you wear on your head. It's a crown that stores energy for the next year. And if it's wet and it stays wet, that crown is gonna rot, and it's called crown rot. Again, you don't need to be a scientist to know what this stuff is. And it will prevent the plant from coming back the next year because it's dead. So by having a good draining soil, it's gonna prevent that. Now, what you wanna do when it comes to planting is I'm gonna plant up 4 plants in this container. Now you're probably going to say, Luke, I am going to go insane if you space these any closer together. Okay, go insane. I plant my plants like this, I have great success. What I always stress is that plants do not need specific spacing, okay? So if you're someone that says they need specific spacing, just ignore your own thoughts. And what I'm trying to say is the fact that by giving them the best soil possible and by continuously giving them great nutrients in organic fertilizers and continuously feeding them with good, rich organic fertilizer and putting them in a good, rich soil, they are going to grow to their genetic potential regardless of what spacing is. They're going to be cramped, okay? They're going to be cramped. Yes, they will definitely be cramped. But in a container, high intensity is so important because, yes, most people would say plant a single plant right here. However, if you plant a single plant right there, you are wasting all of this space. And yes, that is traditional spacing. This would be the traditional spacing for a single asparagus plant. But call me crazy, I'm gonna put 4 plants in that given space because you know, you gotta walk the walk if you're gonna be talking the talk. So anyway, so that's all I do. And we're gonna pop them in there. Oops, there they go. But you know, you can already see here, prime example, like how aggressive these roots are. These roots are huge for a plant that's really only about 2 months old. And so we're going to pop those in there. I had a plant fell out there. There we go, they'll be fine. And there we go. So now let's talk about fertilizing. When it comes to fertilizing your asparagus, it is extremely important to give them a well-balanced fertilizer. Because you're growing them year after year, they're perennials, you need to make sure that you give them something that's well-balanced. In our potting mix, we mix in about 2 cups of trifecta, and that might seem like a lot. However, for asparagus, it's important and it's almost a necessity because of the fact that deep down in that pot, there are roots. And if they don't get fertilizer, the plants they'll let you know. And so by giving them 2 cups of fertilizer, that's going to be the initial feeding. Okay, that's what I put in when I first plant them. Then after that, basically once at the end of the season in the fall time when they start to go dormant, I'm gonna feed them again to make sure that that root system is prepared for winter and it's really doing well. So I'm gonna feed them a 1/4 cup in the fall. Then in the spring, I'm gonna feed them another 1/4 cup, and I'm just gonna scratch it into the top surface and water it in, and that's how you fertilize. You can also top dress with some compost. That's gonna be fine as well because the soil level will drop over the years. And this is what I was getting into in the beginning of the episode where it's a little more hands-on. It's not just plant it and harvest it and forget it. Now the next thing we want to talk about is basically the sunlight requirements. Because this is such a large pot, again, make sure it's in the spot that you want. But make sure that spot is going to get at least 6 hours of sun. Asparagus, although it may seem wimpy and it may seem, just like something that can handle 4 or 5 hours of sun, at least 6 hours of sun, if not more, because of the fact that you're growing it for leaves. These little ferns are actually leaves, believe it or not, and they produce energy for the plant. And that goes down into that rhizome, into that crown, and it stores that energy for next year. So the more sun you can give it, the more energy that's going to be stored, and the larger and bigger your plants are going to be next year. Now the next thing is watering. When it comes to watering, you need to make sure you keep it well watered. But again, asparagus is something that does not like to remain wet for a long time. So it's difficult in a container to do that. If you have the right soil type, you're gonna be set. You can water it till your heart's content, and the water is gonna flow out the bottom. Make sure the pot has drainage holes in the bottom, and make sure you water at least twice a week, because of the fact that these pots are gonna dry out. However, you do not need to worry as much as some of our other pots in our container gardening series, because it's such a large pot, it's gonna hold on to water a lot longer regardless of the soil type. You could have sand, and if you had sand in this pot and sand in the asparagus pot, there would still be a noticeable moisture difference in the very center regardless of what you're using. So again, you don't have to water as much, but make sure you water at least twice a week. And make sure you are at least testing too with your finger. Stick your finger in the soil and make sure that it's not damp already. Because if it is damp, you don't need to water. But if it's dry, about 2 inches down, give it some water, and your plants are really going to thank you for that. And that's really all there is to growing asparagus in containers. It's not difficult at all. When it comes to overwintering, just make sure you apply some mulch. It can be leaf mulch, it can be newspaper mulch, it can be pretty much any type of mulch that's going to hold in air. Air is a very good insulator, and you just don't want the crowns getting cold. If the crowns get too cold, below about -5 degrees, 0 degrees Fahrenheit, they're going to suffer for it. So they can tolerate very cold weather and still come back the next year. But again, at a certain point, it drops off, and they're used to being in the ground. They're used to having a significant amount of insulation from the surrounding soil and from snow on top of the pot when it snows in the wintertime. And so by putting like leaves on there and stuff, it's going to simulate that snow, and you're going to have better success with it coming back in the springtime. Just some type of mulch is all you need to worry about. Don't overcomplicate it. And so there you go. Hopefully you all enjoyed how to grow asparagus in containers. I would recommend growing asparagus in containers because it's a plant that, it's very underappreciated. It's very delicious, very high in nutrients, and it's very fun to grow. So I recommend trying it if you have not already. If you have tried asparagus, let me know how it's been growing for you in the comments box below. And also check out our other videos that we've done on our container growing guides, because we got a lot of them, and we're going to continue uploading more, so stay tuned for those, and I will talk to you all later. This is Luke from the My Gardener channel, hoping you all are growing big or going home. Hopefully you'll learn something new, and I'll catch you all later. See ya. Bye.